The arena dust clung to her boots as she walked, soft and soundless, through the worn stone corridor. No one turned to look. No one whispered her name. Among hundreds of fierce contenders, steel-clad and blood-hardened, she passed unnoticed, a wisp of silence in a place that only praised aloud the brutal, the seen. She was called Kao, though few used her name. Around the barracks, she was the quiet one, that girl in the shadows, or simply forgotten. She trained at dawn, always alone, her sword movements precise and slow, not for spectacle but for something deeper, something inward. There were no flourishes in her strikes, no grunts or battle cries. She moved like a breath in the cold. The iron grounds, where she now approached, were alive with noise. This was the first day of the tournament, a sacred, savage tradition that saw the best of the warrior clans clash for dominance, honor, and command. The victor earned more than title. They earned control of the battalions, the ear of the Lord Commander, and the right to judge the weak. Kale had no ambition for such power. She had entered only because the name Kale of No House appeared, without her knowing, scrawled on the bracket days ago. Some said it was a mistake. Others said it was a joke. She said nothing. Now she waited. Her back leaned against the cold wall as the match before hers played out in brutal bursts of noise. Steel screaming against steel, the crowd roaring. She closed her eyes, tuning it all out, feeling the sword at her side like an extension of her breath. The handle was worn, wrapped in dark cloth, smoothed by years of use. They called for her name. No cheering, a few chuckles, the laughter of young warriors who saw her as decoration. A buffer match before the real contenders stepped into the ring. She stepped forward, chin lifted, face unreadable. Her opponent was already waiting, a mountain of man bare-chested and bellowing, his muscles glistening with oil and arrogance. Bran the Crusher, undefeated in last season's duels. He had a cleaver as long as her arm and a grin that bared teeth more than joy. When he saw her, he tilted his head. "This one," he asked the proctor, "this one will fall faster than my last piss." The crowd laughed. Some even booed in her direction. Kale said nothing. She removed her scabbard, unsheathing a blade that looked too simple to be dangerous. No etchings, no glow, just sharp steel and purpose. The bell rang. She didn't move. Neither did he. He raised his arms, playing to the crowd, turning away from her to drink in their cheers. That was his first mistake. He turned back, not fast enough. Kale had closed the space between them. He didn't hear her move. He only felt the cold whisper of her blade brushing the edge of his belt line. He barely registered the pain as it split through muscle and into the artery hidden just beneath his shoulder. He staggered, stunned. She stepped aside, sword low, gaze flat. Bran dropped to one knee, then to both, then flat. Blood pulsed. The arena went quiet. A scream, somewhere in the upper rows, broke the silence like glass. A second later, the murmurs exploded. Questions, shock, disbelief. Kale didn't look back as she sheathed her blade and walked off the stage. Back in the waiting corridors, 2 elite fighters stepped into her path. One was Risa the Crimson Guard, the other Jorn of Ashcliff. Both had watched from the shadows, arms crossed, unreadable. Risa stepped forward. "Where'd you learn that strike?" she asked, voice low. Kale met her eyes. "I practice." Jorn narrowed his gaze. "That wasn't practice. That was art." "I don't paint," Kale replied. She walked past them both, leaving only silence in her wake. Word spread like wildfire. By evening, the story had warped. Some claimed she struck before the bell. Others said she used a poison blade. One tale claimed she never drew her sword at all, that Bran had simply fallen by fear alone. In the mess hall that night, the noise dimmed when she entered. Dozens of heads turned. Eyes held longer than they used to. She ate in silence, as always, but the room shifted around her like leaves in a storm's path. Her next match would be tomorrow. Her opponent? No one volunteered. In the upper chambers of the Citadel, where the elders watched through enchanted glass, one leaned back in his seat, fingers steepled. "She's too dangerous to ignore now," he said. Another nodded. "Or too valuable." The first chuckled. A girl like that either becomes a weapon or a threat. They would decide soon. But Kale had already chosen. Her silence was never weakness. It was waiting, and the wait was over. He stood like a pillar carved from storm-forged stone, eyes cold beneath a crown of braids woven tight to his scalp. Rykon, known across the 5 provinces as the Top Blade, didn't need an introduction. Wherever he walked, silence followed, not out of respect, but the heavy quiet of fear. He had won 41 duels, most by knockout, some by dismemberment, one by death. That last one was still whispered about in the halls like a myth. The man he'd slain was twice his size, a war-hardened champion of the southern tribes. Rykon had ended it in 6 seconds, sword still clean. No one knew exactly how. No one dared ask. Now, in the shadowed halls of the Iron Grounds, Raken's name was spoken again, not in praise, but in curiosity, laced with something new. Tension. Kale's victory had changed things. Not just because she won, but because she won in a way no one had seen before. Rykon had watched it from the upper tiers, arms folded, face unreadable. While the others gasped or speculated or sneered, he'd said nothing, but his eyes had narrowed. "Clever trick," said one of his lieutenants that evening, referring to Kale's strike. "That wasn't a trick," Rykon answered without looking up. She had executed something real, something rare, and most importantly, something he didn't fully understand. By morning, a new bracket had been drawn. The elders wanted answers. The public demanded blood. The next match would be Kale against Rykon himself. It wasn't a fair decision. She was a newcomer and proven beyond one win, but fairness had never been the code of the arena. The Iron Grounds respected strength and spectacle. Kale was now both. She said nothing when the announcement came. No objection, no sign of surprise. Only a brief, unreadable pause before she nodded once and returned to the training yards. Rykon trained alone, as always. His sword, a heavy, blackened thing etched with old runes, moved like wind in his hands. Observers once likened him to a machine, but machines lacked his grace. Every swing, every step was calculated violence. He was a dancer of death, choreographing endings with lethal precision. He did not fear Kale. He feared the unknown, and in her silence and strike, he'd seen something he couldn't predict. That alone made her dangerous. He remembered being 15, younger than most, when he was taken into the mountain hole by the Brotherhood of the Blade. They taught him not just how to fight, but how to kill without mercy, without pause. That training shaped him into a perfect sword, stripped of softness, carved of control. Now, years later, he stood at the pinnacle of that discipline. And yet here was a girl, barely out of obscurity, challenging the order of things. The night before the match, Rykon sat cross-legged in the shrine chamber. Not for prayer. He no longer believed in gods, but to steady his mind. He closed his eyes and saw her again, small, steady, unblinking, as she made a man like Bran collapse like a felled tree. He couldn't read her. That was what disturbed him most. Even the fiercest warriors cracked before battle. They blustered, laughed too loudly, barked orders, feigned indifference. Kale did none of that. Her silence wasn't meekness. It was power, dense, focused. She was the eye of a storm. Kale, meanwhile, sat at the edge of the sparring field, watching the wind stir the dust. She had no plan to beat Rykon. She never planned the outcome, only the execution. Every fight to her was an equation. Time, angle, breath, motion. She learned early that precision outlasted strength. Timing shattered power. People around her were still speaking in fragments, analyzing her strike from the first match. Some said it was luck. Some said she used magic. She didn't listen. She had no interest in their theories. She had studied for years in silence, while others celebrated noise. That was her edge. Now she would test it against the top warrior alive. On the day of the duel, the stands overflowed. Even the outer rings were packed. Merchants, children, lords, and outlaws alike had come to witness what they believed to be either a coronation or a fluke undone. Rykon entered the silence, but it was not the awkward quiet Kale once drew. This was reverent, heavy with memory. His armor, forged of dark iron and scaled leather, whispered with movement. His eyes didn't scan the crowd. They were already fixed on her. Kale stood opposite, unarmored save for her shoulder guards and wrist braces. No symbols, no crest, just her and the blade. She didn't bow. Neither did he. The signal dropped. They didn't charge. Instead, they circled, measured, slow, two predators trying to read the other. The tension was unbearable. Somewhere, a spectator gasped at a feint that didn't happen. Rykon struck first. It was a diagonal sweep, elegant and brutal, aimed not to kill but to test her defense. Kale ducked, not back but into the movement, letting the air slice past her cheek. She didn't counter. Not yet. He adjusted, faster now. Another strike, horizontal, then vertical. She moved like smoke, not dodging, flowing. He growled low in his throat. Finally, she moved in. One step, then two. He responded with a block, turning the sword edge to parry what he thought was an attack. But she didn't swing. She stepped again. Close. Closer. His knee came up to strike her ribs. She was already gone. She ducked under the arc of his elbow, turned and her blade came up in a single, tight motion. Not to cut, to show. He paused. She could have ended it. The blade hovered at his throat. The crowd didn't make a sound. Then slowly, Kale withdrew one step back. Her eyes never left his. He stood still, weapon lowered, and for the first time in all his victories, Rykon yielded. He dropped his blade to the ground, never breaking eye contact. Then he turned and left the ring. The judges didn't move. No one did. Kale looked down at the sword in her hand. Then she turned, walked to the edge of the arena, and disappeared into the shadows once more. This time, no one laughed. No one doubted. And deep within the citadel, where whispers carried more weight than law, someone said aloud what others had only begun to fear. She isn't here to fight for a title. She's here to rewrite the order. The story was no longer about how the quiet girl won. It was about what she would do next. The silence that followed Raken's surrender echoed louder than any roar the Iron Grounds had ever heard. Word of his yield spread through the city like flame racing up dry parchment. No one had expected him to kneel. Not for a warlord, not for a council, and certainly not for a nameless girl with no banners or bloodline. But Kale had changed the rules, not with speeches or boasts, but with a kind of quiet that cuts deeper than steel. By the next sunrise, the council summoned her. A rare thing. Only champions, commanders, or threats were called to the Tower of Edicts. Kale entered the chamber with her usual composure, her steps measured, her expression a mask of unreadable calm. She wore no armor, only the dark tunic and leather boots she always trained in. Her sword she left at the door. The council was waiting. 7 figures seated in a crescent of stone thrones, each robed in shades of gray and silver. High Lord Velmar, thin and sharp-eyed, leaned forward with hands steepled. He studied her as if trying to see through her skin into the soul beneath. "You were not invited to this tournament," he began. "Your name was not submitted by any house or order. And yet, here you stand, victorious." Kale said nothing. Another counselor, Lady Tenevra, spoke next. "Rykon is not a man given to mercy. For him to yield, it unsettles the balance we have kept for decades." Still, Kale remained silent. Velmar gestured, and a servant brought forward a scroll bound in black ribbon. "You are being offered a command," he said. "Effective immediately. 100 soldiers under your control. You will lead them where we say. Fight who we command. Accept, and you'll be protected, respected, perhaps even feared." Kale looked at the scroll, but made no move to take it. "I didn't come here to lead," she said softly. A murmur rippled through the chamber. Velmar's smile thinned. "Then why did you come?" "To see who was worth following." No one expected that answer, least of all Rykon, who stood unseen in the shadows near the chamber's edge. He had requested to be present, but not heard. As her words settled over the room like a long-forgotten truth, he understood them better than the others. He had once sought the same thing, not conquest but clarity. Now, he watched a girl who had bested him without cruelty, and he felt no shame. Only a strange, quiet admiration. "She's dangerous." Tenevra whispered to Velmar. "Too unpredictable." Or exactly what we need, another council muttered. A sword that chooses its own target. Velmar stood, then let her choose. Kale, your next opponent is not in the arena. A caravan of rebels has been intercepting our supply lines. Skilled fighters. Guerrilla tactics. If you can break their line, we'll call you more than champion. We'll call you ours. Kale did not nod, nor ask for maps or details. She only said, "Where?" By dusk, she was gone. 2 days later, deep within the frostbitten Raver Pass, Kale stood with her sword at her side, watching smoke curl from a recently raided supply cart. The attack had happened hours ago. The ground bore the patterns of swift horses, light boots, and precise movements. Whoever these rebels were, they didn't fight like raiders. They fought like soldiers. Kale moved to the camp remains, examining torn banners and discarded satchels. One caught her eye, a sigil etched faintly into the leather, a circle broken by a single, jagged line through the middle. She recognized it. It was a symbol she hadn't seen in years, the mark of the waking flame. She had once trained with them, long ago, before she left the mountains. They were not rebels then, just thinkers, philosophers, and warriors who believed in balance over dominance. They taught her the stillness of mind and the value of silence. But when the lords outlawed their teachings, the flame was scattered, hunted. She thought they were gone. Apparently not. Night fell. She made no fire. Slept against the trunk of a frost pine tree. One eye open. The next day, the flame found her. They came silently. 2 scouts slipping through the trees like whispers. She sensed them before she saw them, and did not reach for her blade. A third figure stepped out. A woman, tall, dark-eyed, and wrapped in the red-gray cloak of the old order. "Kale the Quiet Path," the woman said. "We heard you were alive. We did not believe it." "I didn't believe you were either," Kale replied. They stared at one another for a long moment. Then the woman smiled. "I am Sarah. I lead them now, and I saw what you did to the champion. I didn't kill him. No, that's what made it matter." Kale's gaze hardened. "I didn't come to join." Sarah nodded. "We know. You came to see who was worth following." The same words she'd spoken in the council chamber, echoed now in the voice of an old path. "But you've already found your answer," Sarah continued. "You just haven't admitted it." Kale looked past her, to the gathered figures emerging from the trees. Young, old warriors, healers, thinkers. Not rebels. Not enemies. Survivors. "I'm not here to lead," Kale said again. "No," Sarah agreed. "But perhaps you're here to wake what was forgotten." Kale didn't answer. Yet she didn't leave either. By morning, she stood beside them as they moved toward the next valley, where the council's patrols would surely come looking for blood. She had not chosen a side, but the blade she carried would soon make the choice for her. The morning mist clung to the valley floor, silver threads curling between tree roots and broken stone. Kale moved like she always did, quiet, measured, unseen, her eyes tracing the tree-line, ears tuned to the forest rhythms. Behind her, the waking flame prepared. They did not look like warriors. That was the point. They dressed in muted cloth, patched leather, light boots. No shields, no sigils. Each one held a blade, bow, or staff with the comfort of one who needed no decoration to prove skill. Among them, Kale stood neither above nor below. She did not bark orders. She did not explain her presence. They followed her nonetheless. News traveled faster than fire. The council had not waited. 3 regiments now descended from the northern slope, well-armed, uniformed, and led by a high warden named Solon Myr. He was known for his precision and for having no tolerance for deviation from the council's rule. Kale remembered him from years ago. He had been younger then, more eager, less cruel. But power had worn the softness from his gaze. Now he came not just to destroy the waking flame, but to ensure that Kale's defiance never became myth. From her perch near the ridge, she saw their formation, disciplined, rows of glinting armor and war horses moving with mechanical precision. Solon rode near the center, a banner trailing behind him like a wound in the wind. Sarah stepped beside her, breath steady. "They won't parley." Kale shook her head. "They weren't sent to." What will you do? Kale didn't answer immediately. Below, the soldiers spread like a stain across the earth, cutting through the trees with sharpened axes to clear a path. Standard tactics. Dominate the field. Control the high ground. Flush out the prey. They don't see us as equals, Kale said at last. That's their mistake. Sarah nodded once. And ours. We forget that silence doesn't mean surrender. The battle didn't begin with a clash. It began with a note, soft, distant, a signal from one of the flame's lookouts. Then stillness. Then movement. Arrows. Not dozens. Just enough. Loose in the shadows of the trees, they sang through the mist, finding gaps in armor, striking not for show but for pause. The first line of soldiers stuttered, momentum interrupted. That was all Kale needed. She moved, not into the center, not toward the banner. She darted between their flanks, where the edge of their formation had grown lazy, assuming superiority. Her sword struck without warning, silent, swift final. She didn't fight like a soldier. She didn't need to. She fought like a mirror, reflecting every mistake, punishing every overstep. When a blade swung wide, she was already inside it. When a spear thrust forward, she slipped beneath, elbow to throat, wrist to ribs, silence to silence. Solon saw her finally, across the chaos, and wheeled his horse toward her. He dismounted before he reached her, tossing aside his cloak. No war cries, no speech, just the sound of drawn steel and remembered history. You left before your oath was fulfilled, he said. I never made an oath, she replied. You were born to serve. I was born to choose. They came together without ceremony. His strikes were trained, elegant, rehearsed by years of rigid command. Hers were reactive, instinctual, and answered every question he posed with his blade. They circled, surrounded by the fog and muffled cries of battle. He swung low. She leapt. He feinted left. She didn't fall for it. Their swords met once, twice. Then Kale turned her body, not just to dodge, but to shift his weight against him. He staggered. She pressed in. The duel didn't last long. It couldn't. He was skilled. She was inevitable. When he fell, it was not with a scream, but with a grunt of disbelief. He looked up at her, confusion blooming across his face like cracks in glass. You don't look like a hero, he rasped. I'm not, she said and turned from him. The soldiers saw their commander fall. Some hesitated. Some fled. A few dropped weapons entirely. The flame did not chase. They did not revel. Kale stood still. The valley held its breath. It was over. By nightfall, the wounded were tended, the fallen buried. The flame gathered in a quiet circle around Kale. Sarah approached, holding a strip of crimson cloth, the old symbol of leadership, used before the councils outlawed such titles. Kale did not reach for it. I didn't win this, she said. We did. Sarah met her gaze. Then lead us together. Kale looked to the stars, to the silent sweep of wind across the trees, to the place where the fight had been, now still. She nodded once. Not a command. A promise. The war had not ended. The councils would not forget. Power does not yield easily. But now there was a story moving to the land. A whisper of the girl who made the strongest kneel, who unseated the order without raising her voice. And wherever it reached, people began to ask not who she was, but what else might be possible.